I remember Sunday night driving up Wells Street, and the protesters were coming down Wells Street, and they got in my car and started doing this to it. So I was almost the victim at that time. And I remember any number of sequences where there were you would see on Wells Street, you would see the demonstrators being chased by the police, and they would be beating them.
And they'd be gassing.
And they would then leave them on, and they wouldn't arrest them, they would leave them on the streets and maybe come back and beat them later.
Did that happen immediately? I mean, as soon as the protesters approached the police, or was it gradual?
This sort of thing started the weekend before the convention. And during the convention, of course, I was on the street during the battle for Michigan Avenue, which only lasted about 20 minutes. But as you know, Joel, it was televised nationally.
And repeated over and over again, in part because there was a union strike, and they couldn't have all the cameras that they needed to get out, in part, to other parts of the city. And so they just repeated these same scenes of the people being clubbed on the streets.
But what became complicated is that in many of these clashes, and particularly that night on Michigan Avenue, innocent bystanders got caught up in this. And then the other thing which went against the mayor and the city's reputation in the short run was that among the very many who were beaten by the police were newsmen. One night there were something like 20 national news people who were beaten. I took great care to wear a suit and a tie, very much similar to yours, and I would kind of be over there seeing this, but many of the journalists didn't, and they were beaten. It all took place, by the way, in one of the most beautiful weeks ever in the history of the city. The weather was simply perfect. It was soft, August, the skies
It wasn't too hot?
The sky,
I mean, that didn't
it was,
work into
I'm telling you, it was perfect. Then let me tell you something else. During the week, during all of this, many of the protesters were among the ugliest, meanest, most wretched of the earth. Police behavior, ugly, mean, wretched. Not one person was killed.
Did it change your lives in terms of how you cover news? And
it was the most complex, frightening, exhilarating, informative phenomenon I'd ever covered before or since.
You know, I don't know if any of you have gotten this question. I assume you have, because I've gotten it quite a bit, and that is, what was he really like? Elizabeth, when you're asked that question, what would you answer?
You know, he was one of those people that was really like what you saw on television. It was his warmth and his intelligence and his as we've said, his just love of life and curiosity about wanting to know how the world worked, and his warmth. That's who John Callaway was.
Rich, what do you say to that question?
I would say that what resonated with John and me was his love of his kids, because I think, you know, we all, I think, at this table, because we have such remarkable kids, all of us.
Of course.
That I think that that's what impressed me, and of course we all know that his daughters are performers. He was enormously proud of them, and every time they made a new CD or recording, we were all given copies, and we met them and heard them perform on many occasions. And I think the interaction between the father and the two daughters was something that also, I think, very much impressed me.
Joel, as someone who has known him,
to me it was his love of my kids and my wife. I mean, I really felt like he was a part of our family, and he just, I think the one thing that doesn't quite creep out is as warm as he is, there's a personal side that belied what were some of these public policy. I think you tend to identify him with public policy. And he was, in many ways, the most regular kind of person you'd ever want to meet. I mean, he'd like to go have a drink. He'd like to go play golf. I've had many funny moments on golf courses with him. And he was someone, you know, who was a big sports fan. He taught his daughter, and was so proud of his daughter Liz, who could imitate Marv Albert announcing the Knicks. And he'd bring her down to the studio and he'd say, "Go ahead, Liz, go on. The Busher has the ball." And then she'd pick it right up and go into the passing it around to all the other New York Knicks of the championship era. So he was really quite an ordinary in that respect. But again, effusive in his love. You could feel it, and his pride.
What you saw was what you got, Carol?
Yes, but you know, I always felt that, and Mary Field and I talked about this, our executive producer,
right, our boss,
that I knew John Callaway, but I didn't always feel I knew John Callaway. That because he was a complicated man, and I think for lots of brilliant, talented people who could sort of be larger than life when you met them, I also felt that there was a part of John Callaway that was very private and away.
I agree. I think that's absolutely true. And the other thing about John was that you say that he was a complicated person. His worldview was very nuanced. He did not see the world necessarily in black and white.
No, not at all.
And I think that's one of the things that made him a good interviewer, in that he could see different perspectives. He could see different perspectives, and that informed the encounter that he would have with people. Rich,
So he
your
didn't
thoughts on
peg people at all.
No, that's right.
And that's why he could have such a broad interest as he was interviewing them, because he didn't put them in categories.
He was not doctrinaire. In fact, I think he really disliked and distrusted.
Well, I think it's like all of us have said, he really wanted to understand people and understand their views, and so therefore you can't be doctrinaire.
But I think that's because he you know, Mike Royko liked to say that he liked every politician, the rotten ones, the good ones, the reformers, the non-reformers. I think John had a basic respect of the people he interviewed. Whether he was going to have a beer with them or not, he respected them. And I think he respected the viewers enough to know that if he wasn't prepared and he was going to do a stupid interview, that was disrespectful. But if he was not going to be fully versed on David Halberstam or whoever was sitting there, it was a disrespect of that person too.
He honored the encounter by the preparation and by the level of engagement.
And maybe why you think perhaps there was something there that may have been that you couldn't quite get out of him, and maybe there was because his mind would race so fast, and you knew that there was more than what he was saying that was going through his mind.
There were a few battles he didn't win, though. You know, I remember when we were first starting to do computers, John just had a really, really hard time. And I know he was going to take one of our staffers and say, look, I just want like 3 hours of how do I make this work. It was sort of funny to see something that John, you know, couldn't handle. And the other, of course, was battling his weight. I mean, he was always battling his weight and trying to lead a healthier lifestyle. And he would vow that that he was going to exercise this much and he was going to, you know, take care of himself, and, you know, it didn't always work.
You know, I have this image of John in Washington, D.C. Once we were on the road in Washington, and I was having breakfast in this little hotel where we were put up, and I saw John in his just power walking, and I was thinking, you go, John, you're still working at it, still trying to get in shape. But you know, it's not all politicians and journalists. John Callaway had a broad range of interests in the arts and entertainment, and he knew how to have fun.